Picture this. It is the dead of night in the Persian Gulf. Three American guided missile destroyers are cutting through the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical choke points on the planet. A waterway so vital that roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through it. Then, out of the darkness, a swarm of Iranian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and fast attack boats converges on those warships at once. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has just launched one of the most audacious and, let's be clear, one of the most reckless attacks on the United States Navy in decades. What happens next will define the future of the entire Middle East, and the world is watching. Welcome to Geopolitical Analysis. If you're new here, this channel exists for exactly these moments, the moments when the mainstream media gives you the chaos but none of the context. Tonight, we're giving you both. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on because this story is moving fast and we will not stop covering it. Let's start with what actually happened. On the night of May 7th, 2026, the USS Truxtun, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS Mason, three Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers among the most advanced surface warfare vessels ever built, were conducting a transit through the Strait of Hormuz as part of what the Trump administration has branded Project Freedom. The stated objective of that initiative is straightforward. The United States military would escort commercial shipping through the strait, which Iran has effectively blocked for months, holding the global economy hostage. The IRGC was watching, and they made a decision. According to U.S. Central Command, Iranian forces launched what officials described as an unprovoked assault involving multiple ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and small fast attack boats swarming the American warships simultaneously. This was not a warning shot. This was a coordinated multi-vector attack on the United States Navy. The result? Not a single American asset was struck. CENTCOM confirmed in a formal statement that U.S. forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes. Every incoming missile was destroyed. Every drone was neutralized. The fast attack boats that came too close were eliminated. And then the United States hit back, targeting Iranian military facilities responsible for the assault, including missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes in Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and Manab. President Trump, speaking to reporters at the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool during an unrelated visit, said of the Iranian projectiles, "They shot missiles. Every missile was knocked down, every drone was knocked down, and the people that shot it are no longer with us." He later wrote on social media that the Iranian boats went to the bottom of the sea quickly and efficiently, describing American air defenses intercepting drones as dropping ever so beautifully down to the ocean, very much like a butterfly dropping to its grave. Poetic, but there is a much larger story here than a single night of exchanges. Let's go back to the beginning, because this crisis did not start last night. It started months ago, and to understand why three American destroyers were transiting the world's most dangerous waterway under live fire, we need to understand the sequence of decisions, miscalculations, and provocations that brought us to this point. The broader conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran erupted on February 28, 2026, following a series of escalating confrontations over Iran's nuclear program and its continued support for armed proxy groups across the Middle East. The U.S. and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. The IRGC responded by doing what it has done for years to project power without triggering all-out war. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. Think about what that means. The Strait of Hormuz is a passage barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. And yet, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, approximately 21 million barrels of oil flow through it every single day. Liquefied natural gas, container ships, tankers supplying energy to Japan, South Korea, India, and Europe. Iran effectively held a gun to the head of the global economy. A ceasefire was announced on April 8, 2026. Trump extended it indefinitely on April 21st, framing it as an opportunity for diplomacy. The IRGC, however, never truly stopped. Even during the ceasefire, Iranian forces continued to harass commercial vessels, lay naval mines, as confirmed by U.S. military charts showing mines placed as recently as April 23rd, and tighten their grip on the strait. According to CBS News, dozens of tankers and cargo ships remain stranded in the Persian Gulf, unable to move without Iranian permission. Iran's state broadcaster even sent a reporter to Keshem Island to film the empty waters. Behind me, you can see the open waters empty of vessels, the reporter told viewers, adding that all ships were waiting for Iran's permission and the approval of the IRGC Navy to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That is the Islamic Republic's vision for the post-ceasefire order. They control the strait. Everyone pays tribute to get through. Project Freedom was the American answer to that vision. Announced by President Trump last Sunday, the initiative called for U.S. Navy warships to physically escort commercial vessels through the strait, a direct challenge to Iran's self-declared authority over what is, under international law, an open waterway. The announcement immediately created political turbulence. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, both of which host critical U.S. military infrastructure in the region, expressed serious concerns. Not because they opposed the initiative itself, but because when the IRGC had struck the UAE days earlier, the U.S. publicly downplayed the attacks. In the culture of the Gulf, that was read as abandonment. The Saudis and Kuwaitis temporarily suspended U.S. access to bases on their territory. Trump paused Project Freedom. The IRGC celebrated. Iran's senior IRGC military advisor Mohsen Rezai declared publicly that the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed unless the United States paid reparations. He dismissed U.S. peace terms as unrealistic, saying the resistance would not surrender. Then Saudi Arabia and Kuwait reopened U.S. base access, and within hours, the IRGC attacked. The timing is not a coincidence. The IRGC had been watching every piece of intelligence available to them. The KC-135 refueling tankers taking off from the UAE, the C-17 and C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft repositioning equipment and troops across the region, the overall buildup of American military assets. They knew the United States was going to resume operations, and they calculated that they could land the first blows and claim a propaganda victory before Washington moved. That calculation was catastrophically wrong. Now, before we go any deeper into the geopolitical consequences, let us talk about the deal that sits at the center of all of this, because the military confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz cannot be separated from the nuclear negotiations that are simultaneously taking place, and both sides know it. And if you're getting value from this analysis, now is the time to subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications. These events are evolving in real time, and we will keep you ahead of them. The nuclear file is the heart of this entire conflict. Here is where things stand. According to reporting by Axios, the U.S. and Iran are actively negotiating a memorandum of understanding, a one-page preliminary framework that would set the terms for a more comprehensive deal. The core of the American position, as reported by the New York Times, citing 3 Iranian officials close to the negotiations, involves 3 primary demands. Iran must commit to shipping all its enriched uranium out of the country. It must shut down its 3 main nuclear facilities, Fordow, Natanz, and the Isfahan complex, and it must suspend all uranium enrichment for a minimum of 20 years. Iran currently holds approximately 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, according to a May 2025 IAEA report. That is perilously close to the 90% threshold required for weapons-grade material. The IAEA has also confirmed Iran possesses nearly 2,000 kilograms of enriched uranium in total across its underground facilities. In terms of what that means for a nuclear breakout, how quickly Iran could produce enough weapons-grade material for a bomb, analysts estimate the current stockpile represents a window of weeks, not months. Iran has countered with a significantly different offer. According to the Wall Street Journal and Axios, Iranian negotiators have proposed halting enrichment for 10 to 15 years rather than 20, downblending some of its enriched uranium inside Iran under international monitoring rather than shipping it out, and sending only a portion to a third country, possibly Russia. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has described uranium enrichment as a red line. As Al Jazeera's correspondent reported from Tehran, the nuclear enrichment program is non-negotiable. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed this tension directly at a White House briefing, saying that Iran could have a civilian nuclear program if that's what they wanted, but they're not acting like that's what they wanted. Negotiations are being led on the American side by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, with Omani, Pakistani, Egyptian, and Turkish mediators facilitating indirect exchanges. A multilateral Quad meeting involving Pakistani, Egyptian, Turkish, and Saudi officials was also convened on the sidelines of a diplomatic forum in Turkey to push the process forward. According to Axios, the U.S. has discussed releasing up to $20 billion in frozen Iranian assets as part of a deal, a figure that reflects the enormous economic pressure Tehran is operating under. Iran demanded $27 billion. The current number being discussed is $20 billion. But the gap on the nuclear file itself remains enormous, and both sides know it. One senior U.S. official put it with brutal clarity to Axios: Iran clearly wants the $20 billion and a lot more. They clearly want to sell oil at free market rates. They want to participate in the global financial system, but they also want to have this nuclear weapons program. They want to fund terrorists like Hamas, and they don't want to give that up enough to get the things we're offering. That is the stalemate. That is why the Strait of Hormuz is on fire tonight. Now let's talk about what actually happened on the ground, because the picture is more complex than a simple U.S.-Iran binary. Iran's military headquarters issued a statement accusing the United States of operating in cooperation with countries in the region, a direct reference to the United Arab Emirates. The UAE has been in an increasingly exposed position throughout this conflict, as the IRGC began targeting UAE territory and infrastructure. In the days leading up to tonight, the Emirates activated its air defense systems and officially acknowledged intercepting ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. The UAE's National Emergency Crisis and Disaster Management Authority issued public warnings for residents to remain in a safe place and follow warnings and updates on official websites. The IRGC, for its part, also launched ballistic missiles targeting the UAE, with the Islamic Republic formally declaring the Emirates an enemy state. Whether missiles actually struck UAE territory or were intercepted over water near the strait remains unconfirmed. What is confirmed is that explosions were heard inside UAE territory and air defenses were activated. The IRGC simultaneously escalated in Iraq, launching drone strikes on the Kurdish capital of Erbil, a pattern consistent with their strategy of opening multiple fronts to stretch American and allied resources. Here's what all of this reveals about the Islamic Republic's strategic logic and its fundamental weakness. The IRGC is caught in a trap of its own making. If Iran backs down now, if it allows the United States to conduct an orderly transit of 3 destroyers through the strait without serious consequences, it will have demonstrated publicly, irrefutably, that it cannot enforce its own declarations. The entire premise of its Strait of Hormuz strategy collapses. Every future threat becomes less credible. But if the IRGC continues to escalate, attacking U.S. warships, striking Arab neighbors, targeting commercial vessels, it invites more devastating military responses and further economic devastation in a country whose population is already living under the weight of 40-plus years of sanctions, economic mismanagement, and now active conflict. That is a lose-lose situation. And the IRGC walked into it with open eyes. The U.S. position, by contrast, is textbook pressure escalation management. CENTCOM released a measured statement saying it does not seek escalation but remains positioned and ready to protect American forces. President Trump, when asked directly if the ceasefire was over following the night's exchanges, told ABC News, No, the ceasefire is going. It's in effect. He called the strikes a love tap. That framing is deliberate. By maintaining the ceasefire narrative while simultaneously destroying Iranian military assets and personnel, Washington places the burden of escalation squarely on Tehran. If the IRGC stops, the U.S. stops. If the IRGC continues, the U.S. has no choice but to respond harder. It is a political judo move. The European Union has also made its position clearer. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen confirmed in a public statement that she spoke directly with President Trump, describing their discussions as productive and stating plainly that the EU and the U.S. are united that Iran must never possess a nuclear weapon, calling recent events proof that the risk to regional stability and global security are too great. This represents a meaningful rhetorical shift from Brussels, which has historically been far more equivocal about Iran. But rhetoric from Brussels, as always, is not accompanied by action. The United States and Israel are doing the operational work. The Europeans are watching and endorsing. Let's also talk about oil, because the global economy is not an abstraction here. According to market data, oil prices that had fallen roughly 10% over the preceding 3 days spiked more than 1% within hours of the overnight clashes becoming public. The benchmark West Texas Intermediate contract climbed to nearly $96 per barrel. International benchmark Brent North Sea crude rose above $101 per barrel. Every escalation in the Strait of Hormuz translates directly into energy prices, which translates into inflation, supply chain disruption, and economic pain for billions of people around the world who never once thought about the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea, one of the nations most dependent on Gulf energy, is already feeling the pressure. A South Korean cargo vessel, the HMM Namu, suffered an explosion and fire in the strait earlier this week. All 24 crew members survived, but the incident prompted President Trump to personally call on Seoul to join Project Freedom. South Korea's defense ministry said it would carefully review its position. Japan and European importers are facing similar calculations. The longer the strait remains under IRGC control, the more acute the economic pressure becomes on everyone, including Iran itself, which desperately needs oil export revenue to fund its government and military. The IRGC is not just holding the world's oil supply hostage, it is sitting on the same oil tap it needs to survive. So where does this go from here? The most likely near-term scenario is a managed de-escalation. The United States has signaled clearly and repeatedly that it does not want to restart full-scale hostilities. Trump's love tap characterization was not careless language, it was a deliberate signal. Washington is giving the Islamic Republic an exit ramp. The question is whether the IRGC can use it without losing face domestically. The nuclear negotiations will be the ultimate arbiter. According to Axios, the two sides are now arguing over the duration of an enrichment moratorium. The U.S. wants 20 years, Iran is offering 5. The gap between those positions is not unbridgeable. The real obstacle is Iran's demand to retain enrichment capability at all, and the American and Israeli insistence on zero enrichment. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that any deal must remove all enriched uranium from Iranian soil. That is Netanyahu's red line. And Iran's red line is that enrichment is non-negotiable. One possible bridge, the proposal reported by Axios to transfer portions of Iran's uranium stockpile to a third country while downblending the rest inside Iran under IAEA monitoring. Russia has previously offered to take Iran's enriched uranium as part of a settlement. That framework remains on the table. It is not elegant, but in diplomacy, elegant is rarely available. What is clear tonight is this. The world is watching a regime that has spent 4 decades projecting power through proxies, terror, and nuclear ambiguity run out of good options. The U.S. Navy controls the Strait of Hormuz, not the IRGC. 3 American destroyers transited that strait under fire, and not one was touched. The Islamic Republic state media had to manufacture victories for its domestic audience, claiming destroyed warships for which there is no evidence, as CENTCOM confirmed not a single American asset was struck. The propaganda doesn't hold. And increasingly, it doesn't need to, and because the audience inside Iran is not the only one watching. The governments of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and every other nation in the Gulf region are watching too. They are watching the IRGC's weapons get destroyed. They are watching Iranian assets get struck, and they are drawing conclusions. That is the deeper significance of what happened tonight. It is not just a military exchange in a narrow waterway. It is a demonstration, live in real time with real consequences, of the limits of the Islamic Republic's power. The ceasefire for now holds. The negotiations for now continue, but the Strait of Hormuz remains the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth, and this story is nowhere near its final chapter. Stay with us. We will be here every step of the way with the full picture, the real context, and the analysis you will not get anywhere else. Subscribe now if you haven't already, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening in the Persian Gulf. Thanks for watching.